Well, hello everybody. I'm Lynn Fotheringham from the University of Nottingham, and let me try and share screen. Click the share button, the big blue share button, and play PowerPoint. So I'm going to be talking about Greek tragedy on screen, specifically two versions of the Iphigenia at Aulis. One from the cinema and one from television. The one at bottom left is Michalis Kakayanis' cinema version from 1977, and the one at bottom right is Don Taylor's in studio production for the BBC in 1991. So if you didn't catch them and didn't video them, you may never have heard of them. You may, on the other hand, know the image on the left, which is from Michalis Kakayanis' film version of the Iphigenia from the 1970s, which was the third of his 3 Greek tragedy films, and accounted by most people the best. I certainly think it's the most accessible, i.e. it's the one that you'd be most likely to show to friends who weren't classicists if you could persuade them to watch any Greek tragedy on screen at all. But I'm a big fan of Don Taylor's versions. And given that the BBC has never attempted to, well, I think once they attempted to market them as teaching aids at horrendous prices long ago, but they're not marketed, they're not commercially available at the moment. So I have no compunction whatsoever about giving people my digitized copy of my VHS tape from 1990, which I have. So if anyone's interested, let me know. Just a quick word. I know some of you read the play recently, but I believe that that won't be all of you read the play recently. And I imagine that many of you are familiar with the story of Iphigenia's Sacrifice, but I thought I'd just run through it to catch everybody up in case you're a bit rusty on this topic. So the story of the sacrifice of Iphigenia, who was the daughter of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, belongs to the period before the Trojan War, when Agamemnon is leading the Greek troops in the expedition against Troy. And they've mustered at the port of Aulis, or Aulis, in a bit north of Athens. I think it's in Chalkida today. But I'm not completely sure. And there's a problem. They're becalmed in Aulis. There's no wind, or the wind is not blowing in the right direction, and they're stuck there. And the versions vary on why it happens that Artemis says, I'll send you the right kind of wind if Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter. Sometimes Agamemnon has done something specific to annoy Artemis. Other times it's all just a bit vague. But anyway, that's the dilemma in which Agamemnon finds himself. And this is a nice Greek vase, because it's always good to show a nice Greek vase. And I think this is actually the sacrifice of Polixena. And no, don't play with the mouse because it's not going to work. I think the label above the poor girl's head is Polixena. The sacrifice of Polixena, of course, happens to allow the Greeks to return from Troy. The Trojan War is bookended by 2 virgin sacrifices, which is fun. But there are other images which we're not sure whether they're Polixena or Iphigenia. Okay, so the plot of the play is that Agamemnon has already sent for Iphigenia on the pretext that she is going to marry Achilles, that Achilles wants to marry a daughter of Agamemnon before he agrees to come to Troy. Agamemnon, however, has changed his mind and writes another letter telling his wife Clytemnestra to keep Iphigenia at home and do not come near Aulis for any reason. But Menelaus, who of course wants the Greek fleet to sail so that he can get his errant wife back, prevents the letter from getting to Clytemnestra in Argos. And Clytemnestra arrives with her daughter, expecting to get a wedding. Agamemnon decides to go through with the sacrifice, but still hasn't told Clytemnestra, of course, what the real reason for bringing Iphigenia here is. However, it chances that Achilles turns up at Agamemnon's tent. Achilles hasn't been told any of this. And so when Clytemnestra addresses him as her future son-in-law, he's distinctly startled. And in the course of the conversation, the truth is revealed. In the end, Iphigenia decides to go willingly to her death rather than to suffer the indignity of being dragged to it. And then a messenger reports the sacrifice, revealing that Iphigenia disappeared at the last minute and a deer was substituted for her. However, the text is uncertain, and some people think this messenger speech is not original to Euripides. Nevertheless, it's been a part of the play for a couple of millennia now. And secondly, in the scene that we have, Clytemnestra suggests that the whole story might not be true, that it might be made up to calm her down. And of course, we all know what Clytemnestra did to Agamemnon after the Trojan War, and this is one of her justifications for that. So both the messenger speech itself, in terms of the play, and the supposed replacement of Iphigenia in terms of the story are questionable. I hope that's not something I've done wrong that makes the beeping. Is it just more people coming in? Let me know if I need to do something.
It is just people joining, and indeed that's Andy arriving.
That's great. Okay, so it's the IA is Euripides' last play. It was in fact produced posthumously, and some people think it was unfinished. There are various oddities in the language and some extremely long bits that some people think should be shorter. So various theories have been come up with, that it was completed by someone else, that his son put it together from various drafts, that it was embellished or altered by actors later. What else can I say about the play? I should say that it is very easy to read it as an anti-war play, and it's very easy to read all the male characters as deeply, deeply flawed. I'm not a big fan of the fatal flaw theory of tragedy, but I am a fan of flawed characters. And in particular, people who come across the play for the first time, and especially people who watch the Don Taylor production of the play, find Achilles a ridiculous buffoon, and that may be intended. In fact, all the men may be meant to be ridiculous buffoons. At any rate, it's very easy to interpret the play as a whole as using the brutal and pointless sacrifice of this young girl as a critique of war in general and the Trojan War in general. Okay, so that's an introduction to the play, and now an introduction to my approach to Greek tragedy on screen, and indeed to reception issues in general. So I have a project which I call the Authenticity Project, in which I hope to explore various different definitions of authenticity and attitudes to authenticity or accuracy among the creators and the audiences of various different types of reception of the classical world. Films, TV, novels, comics. It's a way of bringing, to be perfectly honest, it's a way of bringing together some of my rather disparate interests under an overarching heading. And one of the reasons I think this needs to be done is that for very sound reasons, many scholars of classical reception downplay the authenticity question. So this is an extract from a book that's actually about, it's called Imperial Projections, Ancient, and it's to do with ancient Rome on screen. Yes, possibly not just on screen, actually. But it's kind of typical of the sort of disclaimer that reception scholars often put at the front of their works. The volume takes as its point of departure the view that representations of the ancient past should not be judged by the ways in which they successfully represent a real text or past events. And I understand why people avoid this question. It's partly because there's nothing more boring than just listing everything that's wrong with a production. I mean, it's very, very tempting to do as a person who's knowledgeable about the ancient world to spot all the errors. It can make quite a fun drinking game when watching most films set in the ancient world. Take a drink every time you spot a mistake. But it's not actually a particularly interesting thing to write about. It just turns into a list. However, in spite of this, I think that the idea of authenticity needs to be explored, and I should actually say the ideas of authenticity, because I actually think this is a very complex question, a very complex notion, and we don't always mean the same thing by it when we say something is authentic. To be perfectly frank, I sometimes think that when somebody says this is authentic, what they actually mean is, I like this. It's a fairly generic way of approving of something. It's assumed to be desirable, but it means different things in different contexts. And these two versions of the Iphigenia are, I think, a wonderful encapsulation of the very different ways in which, in this case, a production of a play and a screen production of a play can be authentic. Because I think they're both authentic, or both have the feel of authenticity, but in very, very different ways. So a little bit of an introduction to the two versions. So Kakayanis was a great Cypriot director of the late 20th century. He made films in the sense of cinema, also at the time when products for cinema were actually made on film, which is no longer the case. And he shot mostly on location in Greece, and he shot 2 of his 3 tragedy films in Greece. The third one was filmed in Spain. And he shot in Greek, again, the third one, the one that was shot in Spain, is actually in English and stars an international cast, including Katharine Hepburn as Hecuba in the Trojan Women. Especially in the Iphigenia, which I think was, I mean, I don't suppose that Tatiana Papamoscu was paid as much as Katharine Hepburn, but it's a lavish production, the Iphigenia. And someone had a great deal of fun constructing plausible, ancient-looking costumes. not looking like the diaphanous garments we see on Greek vases, but looking plausibly archaic. A lot of those things, the location in Greece, including some scenes shot at Mycenae, a lot of those things give an impression of authenticity, a feeling of authenticity. The next couple of bullet points are perhaps less authentic. He reduces the chorus to an absolute minimum. He does a much fuller chorus in his other two tragedy films. He adapts the text. He's translating it into modern Greek. It's not ancient Greek that is being used, but he also adapts it a bit. He adds a few things. He changes the ending. There's no messenger speech. There's no substitution of a deer. He also makes it quite explicit that the wind starts to blow before they sacrifice Iphigenia, so the whole thing is just a plot on the part of Agamemnon's enemies. But most notably of all, I think, he adds a lengthy prologue in which we get to see the army becalmed at Aulis. We get to see somebody killing one of the deer that is sacred to Artemis. We get to see the revelation of the Artemis's ultimatum, and we get to see the letter arrive at Mycenae / Argos. We get to see Clytemnestra and Iphigenia prepare for the journey, etc., etc. So it very much, this production takes thought for the audience who isn't already familiar with the story. It shows what is compressed into speech, into dialogue in the play itself, and which that material, which we also imagine that many of the original Greek audience would have been already familiar with when they arrived in the theatre. So it's certainly reaching out to a wider audience by doing that, I think. And again, although there is a short prologue there is a prologue in his Electra, there's not much of a prologue, not much of the way of action in the Trojan Women. So it's the sort of fully developed form of his approach to Greek tragedy. Don Taylor, on the other hand, was working for television. He had started at the BBC back when most television drama was still shot and broadcast live, and he was a great enthusiast for that particular kind of television. So he shot all his tragedies and all his plays that he could get away with in the studio at the BBC in long continuous performance. So the actors were in the studio for 2 hours doing their thing, and 3 cameras were running around capturing the appropriate bit. He also produced his own translation, but his attitude to the representation of ancient Greece is very different from Kakayanis. His costumes do not belong to any particular period, any specific period. He is neither setting it in ancient Greece, nor is he setting it in a particular modern period. We'll look at the costumes in a minute. He had a full chorus in all his tragedies. He did the Theban plays in 1986, and he hoped to do a Euripides trilogy in 1990, but they only ever let him do Iphigenia, and he abandoned television shortly afterwards and dedicated himself to radio and theatre. He uses a full chorus in all his plays. And indeed, he insists on using the complete text of the IA, and indeed in other versions where scholars have sometimes argued that this bit or that bit or the other bit is not Euripides or not Sophocles. Taylor was absolutely insistent that every single line on the page was added to the drama, and he, as a dramatist, was better placed to make these decisions than any scholars who were not dramatists. And although he adds a short prologue scene, it's very, very short, and it just shows Agamemnon writing the letter. So in terms of the chorus and in terms of doing the play, he's much more authentic than Kakayanis. Okay, so some pictures now to show you what sort of thing I mean. So here are the four principal characters in Kakayanis' film: Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, Iphigenia, and Achilles. And you can see already from these images that he is shooting on location, outdoors, and with an antique look, an archaic look to the props and costumes. And these images show more clearly how he makes the most of his location shooting with broad vistas, horse-drawn carts, Mycenae in the bottom left-hand corner, which for some reason is in ruins. I'm not sure why it would already have been in ruins when Agamemnon and Clytemnestra were living there, except that it's in ruins now when Kakayanis filmed there, of course. I always find that slightly funny. I'm not sure bottom right, that may be another bit of Mycenae, or it may be just something that looked right. I'm not completely certain. Those of you who've been at Mycenae recently may be able to help me there. And one thing he does in particular, that he uses the possibilities of film to do and the possibilities of location filming to do, is really emphasize the suffering of the Greek army in the heat and dust as they wait desperately for a wind to blow. So I think all these images show that the scorching sun in the first and second, on the top two images, and the one on the right, it's shining through the masts of the ships. Agamemnon sweating as he waits to find out if his letter has got through, and the army gathered and one man collapsing from the heat to demonstrate just how bad things have got. So he's absolutely making the most of the location. And I said that someone had great fun with the costumes. I think these are fabulous. I could talk about just about the costumes for an hour quite happily. I particularly love the sun hats for the women and the helmet masks for the men, which I think, although they don't look like the mask of Agamemnon from Mycenae, I think they are inspired by that particular kind of grave goods. In contrast, Taylor's production looks very different. And here are the main cast. Some great names here. A very, very young Fiona Shaw. She was already a big name in theatre. Roy Marsden, who was Adam Dalgleish at the time. I wonder, I have more affection for this Agamemnon than for some Agamemnons, and I wonder if it's because he felt like Adam Dalgleish. A young woman named Imogen Boorman, who had a career for about 10 years after that, but then disappeared. And I don't know much about Graham Sinclair. But in contrast to the location, Taylor is making no attempt whatsoever to disguise the fact that he is in a studio. That is a very obvious painting of a sky and ship masts in the background. It's not that the arrangement of concrete steps is unconvincing or anything like that, but it's just a little bit too tidy to be realistic location shooting. And Taylor was in fact aggressively anti-realist. To his mind, theatre was theatre. It belonged inside, and when you transferred it to the screen, you kept it inside in the studio, and you designed your sets in a way that made the artificiality clear. I do, however, want to draw attention to the two slides on the left. I think they are enough to demonstrate that the floor of the studio set here was created with a circular feeling of paving stones, imaginary paving stones, painted on paving stones, that I suspect are meant to evoke the orchestra of an ancient theatre, the round dancing floor. And I wonder if the steps at top right, with the chorus standing on them, that particular arrangement isn't meant to evoke the theatron, the seating area of an ancient theatre as well. So I think he's nodding towards that. This image on the bottom right is included to show that he does make some use of the possibilities of camera production, of screen production. He does have a change of scene. His scene with Agamemnon writing the letter is clearly in an interior of one of the buildings that we see in the wider set. So he does move his cameras around. He's not simply presenting theatre as putting theatre on screen by plonking a camera in front of a proscenium arch theatre. He is using cameras and the abilities that they allow to do something that you couldn't replicate in a theatre. And then I wanted to look more closely at the costumes. And you might, from the top layer of pictures here, say that he is going simply for early 20th century look. Roy Marsden's Agamemnon was compared with Tsar Nicholas in at least one of the newspaper reviews of the production. And the outfits worn by the women are actually extremely difficult to date because they're formal outfits, and military and dress wear are both extremely conservative. So you might still go to a ball dressed in something like what what Iphigenia and Clytemnestra are wearing. You might still find a dress uniform that looks a bit like what Agamemnon and Menelaus are wearing on the left. So they're actually quite difficult to date. But the costumes of the soldiers, despite the very antique looking cameras in their hands, berets came in a lot later. That's actually a much more modern look to the soldiers. And if that's not convincing, take a look at the chorus at bottom right. That is not a realistic set of costumes at all. It's a bit Little House on the Prairie, but you don't get in a late 19th century American frontier drama, you don't get 12 women all dressed in dresses of absolutely identical cut, each one in a single solid color. So that's not realism. And he actually, this was explicitly talked about in relation to his Theban plays. And in the Oedipus in particular, there was much more of an effort to include a huge range of periods in the costumes. And his goal was to demonstrate the timelessness of the plays by not tying them to a particular period at all. Okay, so I hope that's given you a flavor. I will, let's see. I'll just say a bit more about the authenticity question. I think they do, both of these productions convey a kind of authenticity, but they are, they're interested in being faithful, in being authentic to different aspects of the original. So Kakayanis is interested in the Greekness of the material. He's interested in the ancientness of the material. So he chooses to film at Mycenae, even though that looks slightly odd because it's ruined. And certainly when I've questioned my undergraduates about their response to this, they feel that that gives it an authentic feeling, even though it's illogical that Mycenae should be in ruins. Taylor, on the other hand, is interested in the theatricality of the play. Okay, our stages and Taylor's BBC studio are not like ancient theatres anymore, though there may be a nod towards it in the orchestra circularity of the floor. But it's the very artificiality of Taylor's productions can itself be seen as authentic to the highly artificial and stylized dramatic form which Greek tragedy is. He translates it into the audience's language in order to make it accessible, whereas the Kakayanis relies on realistic filming techniques and that contextualizing prologue that I talked about earlier to make it accessible. I should defend my saying it's the audience's language. Modern Greek for Kakayanis' film, of course, it was his language and it was the actor's language. But he was very definitely aiming at an international market. And again, my undergraduates, many of whom are not fans of subtitles, let me tell you, nevertheless find the Greekness of the language evocative, even though it's modern Greek, not ancient Greek. For the international audience, doing it in modern Greek is not a familiarization process. An accessibility process. I'm not sure Taylor was aware of this, but I think the timelessness or at least the non-period specificness of the costumes in his production is, I think, quite a good match for the Greek audience's response to the mythological material, which both is and is not historical. It's the past, and many bits of Taylor's production look like the past, but you can't pin it down. I think that's actually quite authentic in that I don't believe whatever Herodotus did in terms of calculating how many generations ago Oedipus was, or Iphigenia or Agamemnon, I don't think the audience in the theatre of Dionysus were worrying about that when they came to the plays every year. And so he has very stylized choreography and acting that seems to some of my undergraduates at least rather mannered and dated. Again, that may actually be quite authentic in terms of the fact that we think ancient Greek drama was also extremely stylized. And he lets the play stand by itself as Euripides intended it to. He really doesn't add any explanation. So he's very much not going out of his way to familiarize and make this stuff accessible. You have to take it on its own terms. You can, of course, critique both of them, and I've already mentioned the ruined Mycenae being a not particularly authentic element. I would draw attention to the fact that, in my view at any rate, doing it in modern Greek is just as much a translation as doing it in English. And doing it in a way that looks Greek to us doesn't necessarily mean that you're capturing ancient Greekness. The ancient look has to be invented, and the performances actually cannot not be stylized. Kakayanis has been categorized as a realist film director, but he's not doing handheld shaky cam and getting his actors to improvise. So there are limits to his realism. And of course, because he's added so much and changed things, it's not the play. It uses the play as the spine for a representation of the mythical story. And that's fine, that's authentic in its own way, because the ancient poets also rewrote and adapted and changed to create their own effects. Taylor, on the other hand, his stage is not the same as an ancient stage. His theatre is not the same as an ancient theatre. And my bullet points appear to be in a slightly odd order here, with the first and the last one really going together. And in fact, it isn't a theatre, it is a television studio, and he does make use of the possibilities of cameras to do something different to what an audience in a theatre would be able to be exposed to. I remain slightly suspicious of productions, and he's by no means the only one, which turn the ancient Greeks into Victorian or Edwardian gentlemen and assimilate the Greek aristocracy to the British aristocracy. He has to fantasticize the ritual elements, or at least he or the costumer chose to fantasticize the religious or ritual elements, and that's just a shot to show you what I mean by that. The weird makeup and hair are the priestesses preparing Iphigenia for sacrifice. And then there's the fact that although the chorus is in some ways authentic, although they don't sing, it is nevertheless off-putting to some members of the audience. Some members of the audience just switch off when the chorus come on, and many of the newspaper reviews complained about it, though some of them praised the actual chorus members, but they all found many of them found the chorus difficult. So those are my ideas on the question of authenticity and how it can mean different things in different contexts, and how both of these productions are authentic in their own way. And what is the actual time? 2013. Okay. So I am now going to show you some clips, because I don't think it would be fair not to show you some clips. And I've actually got a good 15 minutes worth here. But I think what I will do is I will show you the two versions of the Spectator Ode, and then we'll maybe pick one of the others.
Don't worry about going over the 50 minutes if people are watching.
Okay, if that's okay. I always have too much to say. Okay, so I wanted to show you a bit of Taylor's chorus.
The heavy cavalry, most of all,
sorry. Okay, this is part of the parados, the entry song of the chorus, in which the chorus explain that they've come across the water from Chalcis to gawk at the Greek army.
I ran through the sacred grove of trees by Artemis' temple, where they offer fresh blood from the victim's throats. My cheeks are crimson with embarrassment that in such a crowd we should come to gawk at the Greek armies. Their huge interlinked shields like a brazen wall. Weapons in their armories or stacked by their tents. The heavy cavalry, and most of all, the men. Ajax I saw, Oileus' son, just sitting there, talking to the other Ajax, son of Telamon. He was looking every inch the part of the superstar of Salamis. And nearby, the Thessalians was playing drums and enjoying the interplay of chance and strategy with Palamedes, the sea god's grandson. Diomedes, too, was working out with the discus and reveling in showing off his strength. And strolling close by, Myriones and battle-worth two normal men who claims the war god as his paternity. And Leone's son is here from Mount Pacifica. And Iris, isn't he a beauty? I saw who runs fast as the wind, whom Thetis the sea nymphs bore, and was tutored by Chiron in body and mind. He was sprinting along the seashore with a full armor on his back, keeping pace for pace with one of the crack charioteers for battle and track. Eumelos with a racing four, the son of Prometheus spurred on his team around the lap marker to win, and he tickled their flanks with his whip, and the scream of the driver himself urged them on. Their bits and harness were all gold, the yoke horses grey with names piebald, red name the trace horses with patterns with bold black and white to the fetlock down. The son of Peleus in full pack ran with them and matched each stride, while the whirring wheels and the screaming axle and the bouncing chariot rail raced inches from his side. I saw and a marvelous ships in the bay, too many to count, awesome beyond measure. I couldn't speak, I was dumb with the joy. A sight for my eyes to feed on in treasure, as a bee feeds on nectar and stores honey. Lashing on the right, their oars keeping time, the Myrmidon's battle galleys hove to, fast rovers from Thea like a full Rhine closing the line. High above the waves, carved on the sterns in gold, I saw in full view Achilles' coat of arms, Poseidon's sea-born daughters. Keel by keel, with equal in number, the 50 ships of Argos stood. Tough Capaneus' son, captain of squadron, and the pride of Peleus' blood, Mephistos' heir was supreme commander. On station beside them stood 60 ships from Attica, their admiral, the son of Theseus. For his emblem we keep Pallas herself carved as she flew in her winged four-handed chariot. A symbol sure to bring good luck to any Athenian crew.
Oh, well, let's just keep going. No, I want to introduce. Okay, so I said that in the Iphigenia, Kakayanis effectively cuts the chorus. Two of the choral odes survive. One becomes a sort of lullaby sung by Clytemnestra to Iphigenia when they stop for the night on their journey, and that's followed by a little bit of gossiping among the young girls who have come as Iphigenia's attendants. And then after they get to Aulis, we have this scene which replicates part of what we just saw, but gives it to these young women who are attendants upon Iphigenia.
Είδαμε, έφτασε τα μουκιά. Την ώρα που κάνουν αγώνα. Είδα τον έαντα. Κάθε του βήμα και σεισμό. Το παλαμίδι, πλάγμα της θάλασσας, γοργόσαν το δελφίνι. Το λιώνει, το θεριό της κρίνης. Τον έσφαιρο της πίνου. Και το διομήδι. Έριχνε φίσκο και έτρεμε το κορμί του σαν χορδί. Το μεγάλο θάμβαμα ήταν ο στόλος. 1000 καράβια, ακίνητα. Σαν δάσος ριζωμένο στα νερά. Και με μεσάτρες, άστραφτον στις πλώρες κρυσοσκάτες της γοργόνης. Το πατέρα μου ο στόλος. 1000 καράβια. Για μια γυναίκα. Της μάνας μου την αδερφή.
Πού είναι ο βασιλιάς! Του τη λέω αλλιώς.
Okay. So that's not the order I wanted to do them in, actually. Yeah. So instead of having it the chorus on set by themselves, he turns it into the chorus, who of course asks non-royal girls are allowed to run around the camp and look at the men, coming back to tell Iphigenia all about it. And it's massively shortened. I mean, just from those two clips, just in those two clips, the length is very, very different. And that the clip from Taylor is only a fragment of the paradox of the IA, which is enormously long, and Taylor insisted on doing every line of it. So I now can't see my clock. Would you like the other bits? There is another 10 minutes worth if I show you both of these.
I wouldn't worry. Go with it.
Great. Okay, so this is the point where Iphigenia changes her mind. And this is a point that has been critiqued in particular productions and has been critiqued. I think Aristotle critiqued it, saying that Iphigenia in the first part of the play and Iphigenia at the end of the play, when she changes her mind and moves from fear of being sacrificed to her willingly going to be sacrificed, that it doesn't make psychological sense. And I think that both directors are using close-up to make that transition easier and more plausible for the audience, albeit in very different ways, given that they are very different kinds of director.
So much suffering, mortal men and pirates. Our time is fixed. Terror or ending. None can escape. Never greater agony, never more terrible slaughter inflicted upon the sons of Greece than by Helen and Darius' daughter. Pity, child. In your short life, nothing could deserve such bad luck, such injustice, such an ending. You call me by my true name! Shouting, what about it?
Your daughter has raised, but she must be killed.
Don't speak for her.
I got into a fight for her.
I'll give her one
A
fight.
real thing extolled me.
She tried to save her.
That's right.
Who dare lay hands on you?
The whole bloody army.
What's the evidence there?
They throw the first stones.
Oh my God, this is the end.
I've been brought up in marriage, they say. Set up to lay a finger on my wife. Set up by the minister.
They're brought here from all
But they shouted me down.
civilize the rabble!
Fight some for you still.
One man against the other.
He's touched with my armor.
God bless you for your courage.
The whole world will bless me.
You dare sacrifice her now.
No one while I live. Thousands of them, Odysseus and commands. That's the one.
The Beaches would he choose himself.
No, in him.
Empty choice.
I am mine. Don't worry. I'll stop him.
Will he drag her away?
The right first time by a golden hair.
Should I give him
Hang on to her tight.
my bare arms and protect her?
It may come to that.
Don't be angry with your husband. That's pointless now. God can easily bear what's unbearable. He needs to bear for thanks to trying to help us, but we mustn't let him. Maybe lose his life now and think it's no purpose. There will be the help of him and it won't save us. Let me tell you what I think. You can come very clear to me, and if I must say, let me do it decently. The dignity of you can't deny what I'm saying. You get my way, no matter I'm right. Great! And all the Greeks now look to me for an example. Everything depends on me. The safe passage of the invasion fleet, the destruction of Troy, and safety in the future for all Greek wives from abduction by foreigners. No woman again shall ever be dragged away from her home and contentment by force, once the world has seen the price Paris will pay for the rape of Helen. I shall achieve that at a stroke, simply by giving my life. I shall become famous as the woman who set Greece free!
Δεν θέλω, φοβάμαι. Πονάω τα μάτια μου, η καρδιά μου. Από το φόβο μου, το μίσος, τη μισώ. Λένε σε μισώ. Τόσος στρατός και δεν υπάρχει ένας άντρας να βοηθήσει. Καλή μου μάνα, πού είναι ο πατέρας μου? Πού πήγε ο άνεμος? Γιατί δεν έρχεται και στην αυλίδα? Φανταστείς πως τα νυχτά άνθρωποι πνίγονται, παρακαλώντας τους θεούς να σταματήσει ο άνεμος. Τι αδικία! Όχι, να κρυφτώ. Πρέπει. Δεν είναι ώρα για τροπές. Το πολεμήσει μόνο πως μόνο.
Θα περάσω! Αμήν, Βασίλισσα.
Νόμιζα πως δεν θα έρθεις.
Μόλις πρόλαβα. Δεν τους ακούς. Έρχονται, κατρακυλώντας σε το χείμωνα.
Τι φωνάζει?
Πως η κόρη σου.
Τι? Δεν θέλω να τα ακούσω. Όμως πρέπει.
Θα πεθάνει στο βωμό.
Και δεν βρέθηκε ένας να φωνάξει όχι.
Εγώ και το πλήρωσα σχεδόν με τη ζωή μου.
Καλά οι άλλοι, μα η δική σου.
Και η δική μου. Όπως όλοι.
Χαθήκαμε. Χαθήκαμε, παιδί μου. Τώρα το ξέρω.
Μη φοβάσαι. Θα πολεμήσω εγώ για σας.
Θέλει να ανταμείψουν τα θάρρος.
Αν έχουν μάτια θα με ανταμείψουν.
Να ελπίζω.
Ναι. Όσο είμαι ζωντανός. Σου οδηγεί ο Οδυσσέας.
Δεν θα τολμούσε.
Δεν το ξέρεις. Είναι ικανός να τη σύρει στο βωμό από τα μαλλιά.
Τι να κάνω, πες μου τι να κάνω.
Δεν την αφήνεις. Να την κρατάς σφιχτά στην αγκαλιά σου.
Να την πάρω να... Πρέπει να κόψουν και τα δυο μου χέρια.
Όλοι σου πάω.
πέτει τα νηφικά μου πέπλα. Και το στεφάνι. Μητέρα, άκουσέ με. Δεν ωφελεί να θέλουμε τα δύνατα. Μην προσπαθείς. Το ξέρω. Σου είναι δύσκολο. Αλλά για μένα είναι πολύ πιο δύσκολο να ζήσω. Άκου και θα καταλάβεις. Είναι τόσο απλό. Σήμερα θα πεθάνω. Να το αποφύγω δεν μπορώ. Αλλά πώς θα πεθάνω. Μόνο εγώ το αποφασίσω. Και το αποφάσισα. Θα πεθάνω ήρεμα. Περήφανα. Ωραία. Αυτό θα είναι για μένα. Όποια νίκη. Μητέρα, πρέπει να καταλάβεις. Οι Έλληνες με μια φωνή ζητούν το θάνατό μου. Πώς θα τους αψηφίσω. Εγώ είμαι μια. Και αυτοί χιλιάδες πρόθυμοι να πεθάνουν πολεμώντας. Γιατί εγώ αξίζω πιο πολύ από αυτούς. Ή και από ένα μόνο. Αν ήσουν μάνα τους, τι θα έλεγες. Και κάτι άλλο. Σήμερα κερδίσαμε ένα φίλο. Θα τον αφήσω να πολεμήσει έναν ολόκληρο στρατό και να πεθάνει. Θα ήμουν αχάριστη και δεν το θέλω. Θέλω να ζήσει. Θα ήταν κρίμα να πάει χαμένη τέτοια αντριοσύνη. Μια ζωή ασήμαντη. Σαν τη δική μου. Για όλα αυτά, μια και η Ελλάδα θέλει τη ζωή μου. Στη δίνω.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed those. I don't really have much else to say. I think they speak for themselves. So thank you for listening.